Welcome to the 1% Better Everyday podcast. Today, Chip sits down with Brad Goodman, COO of Apollon Wealth Management, one of the fastest growing RIA firms in the country. Brad is here to talk about something he's personally passionate about, how AI is actually being used inside wealth management practices. Chip, take it away for me.
RJ, thank you very much. Brad, great to have you on the show.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
You came to me with the AI subject as wanting to kind of talk through. I'm really looking forward to that. But before we kind of start here, a little bit of background on yourself.
Been with Apollon since January of last year. Prior to that, spent almost 10 years with William Blair out of Chicago, overseeing new platform services capabilities. And prior to that, was employee 14 at Hightower Advisors in Chicago, helping build out everything from operations to capital markets and the initial infrastructure of the firm.
That's quite a bit. That's a lot of experience.
It's been a fun run.
You're chief operating officer of Apollon, and what are the things that you're looking at as you continue to scale, especially in light of, I saw some acquisitions done recently. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
My personal thoughts on it fold around two different topics. Most important for me is, how do I get more time back in our advisors' hands? How do we allow them to focus on their clients? How do we allow them to go out and find new clients? That to me is priority number one. There's also significant opportunity using the same tools and other resources to help streamline operations behind the scenes, which ultimately then makes it easier, faster for advisors to do what they need to do for their clients.
So you're packing a pretty big punch there in terms of, those are the things that you want to do to support those clients. How have you really looked at kind of the experience of transitioning both process and technology over the last couple of years to be able to handle that scale that you're going through currently?
Yeah. It's a really good question, because I think there's two factors that come into play. One is change management is hard. Advisors like to do things the way that they like to do things. And that's our opportunity to really show them why the tool works, how a tool works, why it's going to make their lives easier, how it's going to ultimately impact and support their end clients. That is a not an easy conversation to have, but some advisors pick up on that really quickly, and some tangibly need to see it. The other aspect of it is there's always a new shiny toy, and so I like to use the cell phone analogy. I have an Apple phone; others carry Android phones, and so I think it's really important from a leadership team standpoint down to set a strategy of where you want to go in the next 12, 18, 24 months. It's important to understand and see what's getting released and launched and what roadmaps are out there, but it's also important to stick to the plan, execute, show value, show ROI, and then iterate from there forward.
Now, I'm amazed at your growth over the last couple of years. And it's interesting too, as I talk to people in the industry, there are a couple firms out there that they reference, and you all are one of them. So kudos to the work you guys are doing. One of the things we see with that growth, right, is a lot of firms are capable of being able to grow to a certain point, right? And then there's that tipping point.
There can be a couple of those at different sizes.
Tell me more.
I think there's natural, I'll call them plateaus or benchmarks. It can be at a $5 billion mark, a $10 billion mark, a 25, a 50. And I think from my previous experience, the challenges and the opportunities that you have to solve around those challenges are different between the firms. And so the way that we think about it at Apollon is we want to set the appropriate guardrails and provide the right infrastructure and feedback and resources to our advisors, but also give them the flexibility and the opportunity to run their businesses the way that they've been successful before joining us. That was a different take in a partnership model at William Blair, and that was a different take in an early growth iteration at Hightower. And Hightower went through a number of different model changes in the early days, and so we had to pivot our support and infrastructure needs based on those changes as well.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little tech. You've gone down a very interesting path, kind of a fast forward path. I believe you're truly embracing AI. Where do you see AI really delivering Apollon's value, right? And value both to the home office, to the field. I know you talked earlier about being able to give the advisors more time to work with prospects and clients, but I'm super interested to hear kind of your approach or your thinking on where you're taking it and where you see the industry taking it.
I'll stick to my viewpoints. I have some guesses of where the industry may go, but um, let's start with the advisor side. I think there is a number of wonderful tools out there that support let's call it advisor note taking, whether that's digital, in person. I think the real value add and the arms race that's happening within the note taking world is really around what do you do with that information afterwards? How do you get it into your note taking, into your CRM system? How do you digest that information and get it into financial planning tools, and really streamlining the day-to-day of an advisor? I think if I had to guess where the industry is going next, it's going to be how do you prepare for a meeting now that you have that information? How do you pull information from your reporting system, pull information from your financial planning tools, produce the reports that you want to produce, take that 2 to 5 hour prep time an advisor may go through and cut it down to 30 minutes. That allows an advisor to go spend more time prospecting. That allows an advisor to have more meetings. That it really opens the door for the productive advisors to go out and facilitate the work that they want to do. From a home office perspective, there's a lot of support and operational workflows that I think are starting to get evaluated, and tools are coming in place to really support that more so now than in the last 10 years. We're hyper focused on what we're doing around account onboarding. We're a multi-custodial firm, so normalizing that process, not only on the data collection side, how do we collect that information from advisors, our CRM system, and clients when we don't know that information, and that can be across the custodial account applications, our suitability information, financial planning details, risk and insurance capabilities, being able to collect that in a seamless way and then send it downstream to the areas that it ultimately needs to be, is step one. And then step two is how do you put the right analytics and models up on top of that with the right safeguards and regulation to bring thoughtful intelligence to an advisor so they can, again, have better conversations with their clients, and not spend as much time digging for that information.
That's a lot of moving parts. A lot of moving parts. Um, are you building it? Are you partnering? What's kind of your strategy there?
Yeah. So we have a strategic roadmap of how to execute on that plan. I was very fortunate during the early days of Hightower. The best way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And so my focus is on the bigger operational workflows and processes, as well as building the right container to store all of that information so I can plug in the tools that are evolving and changing and the new shiny tools. We're lucky that there are great partners out there from a note-taking perspective that have those integrations already in place. So from an advisor perspective, those tools are in their hands, and we continue to iterate and partner with folks on analytics, where we store our data, and the internal workflows that we're building.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me how, for years everybody was calling for, oh, we want to automate, we want to streamline account opening as well as transitions when bringing new advisors in. And really in the last 18 months, it's taken off. And there's some very interesting firms out there that are doing some really good work in this area.
I would agree. I think that comes down to there's two different reasons why I think that door has opened up as much as it has in the last 18 months. One, I think the technology is getting better. And so with large language models, with the right workflow tools, that is easier to do. I think the custodians have also come to a realization that they need to open up the connection points to actually allow that. I won't pick on any one custodian, but they have all spent decades trying to solve the account opening process, but never built the right infrastructure to also allow firms to have their own internal workflows and end-to-end capabilities that are ultimately needed in a fast-growing organization. They've all come to the table, and they're all making great strides now to really allow that to happen.
That's good to hear, because for years I've just watched the process, and it's been, kind of like gears grinding on one another that have very little grease. How about that? So that's good to hear that from you. That's exciting. I know that, when we're talking to a lot of these, a lot of our customers are independent broker dealers or large RIAs, and they are just desperate for new tech. And, that said, you got to look at the providers and say, hey, where do you got hooks? Right. So where are your integrations? And some of them have them with the traditional ones, and some of them have maybe one or two. And how do you play that out? So this is what I'm really, really curious about. Over the next 18 months or so, what one AI use case do you see really kind of expanding and that you are really focused on?
I think for me, it is intelligent workflows, right? So account opening is a component of that. We talked about meeting prep. I think how I need to deploy that at Apollon is different than how I needed to deploy that at William Blair. And I think the AI component of that is going to allow more and more firms to be successful in implementing tools of that nature, where in the past, yes, tools got implemented and maybe they didn't solve 100% of the needs. I do think you're going to start seeing the firms that are leaning into technology and the providers that are succeeding. Those firms are going to be able to scale and grow in a way that may have been a little stickier in the past.
Interesting. That is fascinating to me, because the industry is moving so fast right now. You see all these different moving parts right now. You look at the note takers, you referenced the note takers earlier. They're now slipping into the account opening world. It's getting pretty interesting to watch how this AI is bringing things forward. And you talked about being able to have the data vessel. I think that's the most interesting thing that we're seeing improvements in right now with some great firms out there.
Yeah. My personal belief is I need to be able to own the repository of where all that data is. And I want to plug in the best in breed partners to access that, because it is evolving, and it's a very fast moving landscape. As you were talking, I'm thinking about when you fly somewhere, the where you're starting from and you know your end destination, and sometimes you look out the window, but you ultimately have that plan of where you're going. I kind of feel like we're in that same spot right now. Firms that have really good strategic visions on their technology platforms and roadmaps know where they're going, but they're looking out the window and enjoying the view sometimes.
That's an interesting analogy. Interesting analogy. And you just actually hit one of my questions. Um, one other question I have before we move to a different subject is, when you look at kind of the different AI technologies, you look at, the enabled versus the native.
Mhm.
How are you thinking about that? When you see that enabled or versus the native, where kind of they're growing from, or they're building from the bottom up. I'm just curious what your thoughts are.
I'm going to answer that in two different ways. I think we have seen a significant shift in the tech landscape in the last 24 months. I think prior to that, there was a belief in best in breed technology, go find as many providers as you want. It's all going to work. We'll integrate it for you. And then you end up with this spider web diagram that is almost impossible to maintain. And I had a conversation with an advisor that said, I thought it's supposed to be integrated, and it is, but it's not integrated seamlessly end to end. And so I think where I believe the industry is going is we're going to see more full ecosystem environments, and you may lose a bell or a whistle, but it's much more deeply integrated. And I think ultimately that is a better end result for advisors and their clients.
It's interesting as we've talked with lots of advisors out there. What the feedback we're getting is less is more. We want to get out of the tech business, which they've seen their productivity go down to 25%, area. They want to see that go up, and they just don't want to be. They don't want to own the tech stack anymore. They want somebody else to do it for them.
There's one thing about the technology actually working, and it has to work to stay in the tech stack. It's a whole nother job to manage the contracts, the relationships, the integrations, the entitlements as firms continue to grow. And we're fortunate at our firm that we have a wonderful team that can facilitate that. But for someone that doesn't have the experience of the background, that becomes unwilling and hard to do.
It absolutely does, and I've watched it. There's one of our customers is about 4.5 billion, and I've watched them go through the mental mindset of I want to build it to who's going to provide it for me. So it is a interesting world. 180 degrees flip here. Who are two or three people or firms in the industry that you're paying attention to, and why?
That's a good question. So I have wonderful friends from my past still at some of the predecessors, and so appropriately having conversations with them. Um, we're also part of the merchant ecosystem, and so they have done a wonderful job of keeping us connected with the other large growing organizations that we're partners and peers with, and so I'm very fortunate to have some of those relationships as well.
Got it. All right. As we work to the close, right, of our time together, we like to give you 60 seconds for the 1% better everyday flash, which is you have the floor, no scripts, no safety net. Share something that you find is interesting within the wealth space, or something that has been just kind of gnawing at you that you're working to figure out.
Unscripted, off the cuff. Um, I think it's really important from a culture standpoint. This is something that we talk about as well. Um, I think the acquisition space in our industry is pushing us more and more into what is the new wirehouse. You see the aggregators getting aggregated together, and I think it's important to have really good tech that works, but it's also important to have really good culture and people to differentiate yourself within the industry and build a wonderful firm.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Before we leave, Brad, for folks that want to learn more about Apollon or follow you, where do they go?
Apollonwealth.com. You can find us there, or Brad Goodman. I'm on LinkedIn as well. You can find me on there as well.
Brad, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you.
RJ, that was a terrific interview with Brad.
Yeah. It wasn't an interview. It was just a conversation between two friends. That's what it was.
That is true. It's interesting. I took three distinct items from that conversation. One is infrastructure first, growth second. Second, AI is moving the conversation to capabilities. And third, when I look at it, weaving all the pieces of the puzzle together with the use of AI is becoming more highly, what's the word I want to use? It's becoming more efficient, and there's better management of data, and there's better management of workflows. And I think that Brad brought that point to me without a doubt. And I thought that was absolutely fascinating.
And then it will allow people to focus more on the important stuff as far as the job is concerned, and creativity or whatever your job entails. It's allowing you more time to focus on that.
Well, as you said, their goal is to give the advisor more time to work with clients and prospects. So
excellent. All right. Thanks, Chip.
Long story short, that was a great conversation with Brad today. Obviously, they're growing fast at Apollon, and that's a good thing. So before I leave, I always like to quote my favorite person, Ted Lasso: "Be curious, not judgmental." This is Chip Kispert wishing you well until our next edition of the 1% Better Everyday Podcast.
And Chip, before you go, how about your contact information?
Chip Kispert on LinkedIn, and let's see, Chip Kispert at beaconstrategiesllc.com.
Excellent. All right. And we need to add in a shout out, as this podcast is brought to you by Beacon Strategies, LLC, the go-to resource for roundtables, consulting, and services that support wealth management firms and their providers. If you need some industry perspective or help, please visit beaconstrategiesllc.com. And again, thank you for listening to the Beacon 1% Better podcast. We ask you to share this podcast, rate it, and leave a review, because this actually helps others find the podcast. Again, thank you for listening. And for Chip Kispert and everyone at Beacon Strategies, I'm RJ Malik, and we look forward to you joining us for our next podcast.